Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Kaplan. I'm a technical architect for AHEAD. Wanted to thank you all for attending. I'll give a couple of minutes for the last few attendees to log in and get situated, and then we'll kind of kick this off. Now, if anybody has any questions during the webcast, please feel free to type them in, and depending on the questions, I'll either answer them during the webinar itself or during the question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Give it about another minute or two, and then we'll get started. Appreciate everybody's patience. All right, it looks like we have a good number of attendees already logged in and dialed in, so I'll get this kick started. Thank you again once again for attending the webinar here called Don't Get Dropboxed Out, Understanding and Avoiding the Pitfalls of Not Deploying a File Sync and Share Solution in the Enterprise. My name is Michael Kaplan. I'm a technical architect at AHEAD. Been with AHEAD for about 3.5 years now, and about the last year and a half, really spent a lot of time starting to learn a lot more about the file sync and share industry, knowing that it's a very, very large and growing solution out there in the enterprise today. In terms of deployment, probably around 15% of businesses have it in their environment today, and I know that it's been a pretty popular topic with a number of our customers recently, knowing that most people tend to have something already deployed, whether or not they know it. We'll just kind of dive into that and figure out kind of the best way to deploy it in the enterprise and the ways you can go about doing that. So in terms of an agenda today, kind of do a brief little overview of the current state of the file services industry as it pertains today, then dive into some key drivers for what's driving the need for file sync and share in the enterprise. We'll go over deployment models, the infrastructure requirements if you're looking to stand this up kind of behind the corporate firewall. What are some of the infrastructure components and things you need to be considering if you're going to deploy kind of an on-premise or hybrid solution in your business. And then certainly need to discuss why now. What's driving the need for finally addressing file sync and share in your environment, and what you can do to kind of accelerate that. And then I'll briefly touch on AHEAD's approach for what we would do if we were to get engaged to further discuss file sync and share in your environment. So to start off, I'll do a quick little reality check here. To be perfectly honest, traditional IT can really no longer compete with certain expectations that our end users have been requesting, and that's primarily because of the consumerization of IT and the cloud, so to speak. While I'm not a huge fan of the term cloud, SaaS applications, cloud-based services, being able to just easily swipe a credit card and get access to exactly what you want and being able to pay for it kind of by the drink, so to speak. It's really forcing IT to deliver and drive innovation faster than ever before. Being able to have data-driven applications, SaaS applications, and be able to have that time to market and time to value significantly quicker than it ever has been before. You know, traditional POCs of days past where you'd have 3 to 6 months to stand up an environment, test it out, and then maybe a year later actually deploy it to your teams. That just does not work in today's IT landscape. Most people can go on their phones, go on their tablets, download an app, and all of a sudden they have free access to X, Y, and Z solution. So in terms of CIOs, risk is something that they're willing to take now, mostly through startups, SaaS applications, going to the public cloud. It's inexpensive. Your time to actually begin testing and vetting out solutions is fairly cost effective. You no longer have to spend millions of dollars to figure out whether or not you want a solution. It might take a couple of hundred or maybe a few thousand to really kind of vet that out. Had a customer who was actually originally looking at Hadoop in their environment and ended up originally testing it out in Amazon before bringing it in-house. But it was really just their way of being able to experiment, figuring out whether that solution made sense in their environment, and then to bring it back in-house. Very briefly here, just had a question about whether the presentation will be available afterwards. I'll have to follow up on that. I'm not exactly sure if they'll be sending this presentation out or not. If it's not, I'd be certainly happy to sync up with whoever asked the question and send them a copy of the presentation. That's not a problem. So in terms of file services, it's my opinion that IT organizations must evolve. The business user is going to be requesting all kinds of file-based services, and IT needs to become that broker of file services. Now, I kind of position this in 4 different tiers. You have your general purpose file services, you have your scale-up file services, you have your cloud storage gateways, and then you have your enterprise file sync and share services. I really kind of draw a line in the sand with the general purpose file services. To me personally, I view that particular marketplace as kind of dwindling. That's not to say that there will never be a use case for just general purpose file services. Most of the newer applications out there, if they databases, if they need to write some flat files, highly transactional workloads, that's when general purpose file services or even scale up file services will certainly make a lot more sense than your cloud-based storage or your file sync and share solutions. Those just aren't capable of supporting highly transactional. Those are more kind of asynchronous type solutions, things that send data, accessed infrequently, and really are only pulled down, on command versus needing access kind of locally within your data center necessarily. So from what I see with file sync and share, a shared vision has emerged where the need to access any document from anywhere on any device while offering the ability for unlimited versions or near unlimited versions, but at the same time offering from an IT perspective a highly secure solution that allows the ability to drive application integration, building mobile applications through an API or some form of software development kit. Highly shared in nature, so it drives being able to easily share documents with internal users, external users, seamlessly without manual intervention from IT, and then the ability to drive collaboration, the ability to access your data from anywhere while also being able to work on it with multiple people and make sure that there's the single document that you're working on, so that you're no longer running into kind of issues of the past of needing to email multiple versions and having kind of that issue where one person was editing version 3 and you just got version 5 and now it's time to kind of merge that all together. That's just not the way that IT and businesses need to work nowadays. They need it constantly updated and need the most recent version always. So now we'll dive into some key drivers and use cases of what's driving file sync and share in the enterprise. I really kind of divided into 5 different groups. Traditional file services, they're difficult to manage. It's lack of scalability, and by file services in this case, I mean home directories, group shares, your traditional H drives, your U drives, your S drives, whatever drive letter you might want to call it. Lacks scalability, is platform dependent, tends to be a little inflexible, and your traditional file serving needs, it's a challenge because it's now behind the corporate firewall. In order to access it, you have to dial into your VPN in order to gain, in order to be able to start working with your documents again. Particularly when you're looking at mobile devices, that becomes an even greater challenge. Is how do you get access to those files? There's no simple Windows Explorer or Mac Finder on a mobile device that allows you to start perusing your traditional share drives. Mobilized workforce. I think this is probably the biggest driver in people wanting a file sync and share solution. People are no longer just tied to an office, tied to a cube. They're working from multiple locations, usually 3 or more in any given week. I personally am a big fan of Starbucks, along with my home office, working in the head offices. So I need access to my data regardless of location. And then there are plenty of virtual end user computing, or VDI, and bring your own device initiatives where where IT wants to be able to deliver that value of people being able to use their own personal laptops, their own personal tablets or phones, but there needs to be some kind of wrapper on top of that that secures the corporate data and separates that out from a person's personal data. Email attachment bloat. I can't count for me personally, my email tends to be a bit of a graveyard from a documentation perspective. I get attachments and they just kind of sit there for sometimes years, and I don't start deleting until I start hitting that maximum capacity of my mailbox. So it really becomes a challenge there is when you start also emailing documents back and forth between people. Document sizes are getting larger by the day, and typically when you're trying to send larger files, you're going to start filling up your mailbox very quickly. With Exchange 2010 and above, all of a sudden you're looking at potentially terabytes or more capacity per deployment, and that just becomes very inefficient. It's becoming kind of a document repository, so to speak. So not only do you have things like enterprise content managers, like your SharePoints or your Documentums in the world, but then email also becomes that graveyard of documents that never really get touched. From an enterprise content manager perspective, the challenge here is that I used to be a SharePoint administrator for a couple of organizations. It was very slow to deploy and adapt, and adoption was not the fastest with them. The challenge also was, now that we need external collaboration, being able to set up users, get them access to the SharePoint sites, exposing your internal SharePoint deployment to the public internet, a lot of that becomes very challenging from a design perspective, and it becomes very expensive to maintain overall. And lastly, but certainly not least, you have the Dropbox problem. I would venture to guess that 99% of all organizations have somewhere in their environment your consumer-ready versions of file sync and share solutions. That could be anything from Box, Dropbox, EMC, Simplicity. All of them have their own free versions of these utilities. The challenge with that is IT loses all visibility of where your data is going, whether it's protected, does it have sensitive information, are you potentially violating HIPAA regulations, SOX, PCI, a number of regulatory compliance issues along with kind of data residency requirements. Does the data that you're now syncing across multiple devices, should it only be accessible, in the United States, in the European Union? A lot of that stuff is driving this, and by losing that visibility, IT is highly exposed to the business. It's highly exposed to where their data is, and it's really just the end users are circumventing IT process, and it's becoming that shadow IT that really needs to get addressed sooner as opposed to later. So some basic use cases that I see for file sync and share solutions in the enterprise, your basic file synchronization, being able to easily access and view documents across desktops, laptops, virtual end user computing deployments, and of course your mobile devices, your iPhones, your iPads, your Android devices. I venture not many people are BlackBerry users or Windows Phone users at this point, but I'll give them a little bit of a shout out as well. Doing that allows you to eliminate or at least decrease the amount of infrastructure that you may end up needing, either from being able to alleviate the storage on email servers so that it's at least stored in the appropriate location, and you avoid those 25 meg or greater email attachments stored multiple times across multiple email servers. Being able to derive collaboration, being able to seamlessly work with both internal and external users, ensure that permission structures are maintained, and that corporate governance policies regarding information are maintained, while also allowing those users to basically work without feeling that there's manual IT intervention. I can't count the number of times that I was frustrated needing to set up and deploy FTP solutions, maintaining all those user IDs and passwords, working with the external users to make sure that they reset their passwords, or if we had to reset them, that they were updated. Just became a lot of manual intervention and kind of delayed the need for the ability to collaborate, at least effectively. And that slowing things down just does not work with businesses today. Enhanced IT control, that's pretty self-explanatory. At least then you'll have the full audit and compliance reports of where your data is, who has what particular files, who shared what particular files, and with certain solutions out there, there are even greater levels of visibility. Being able to tag by IP address, being able to set copy, read, write, paste permissions, screenshotting permissions. A lot of that is really not available today, even in your traditional file services. Being able to share extraordinarily large files, greater than 2 gigs in size, without needing to set up an FTP server. You can just right-click on a document, and by virtue of all of those permissions being set up at the user level, they now have the end user is able to share these documents extremely easily without needing to contact IT, getting them to set up an FTP link, and really kind of slowing things down. Your mobilized workforce, as I've touched on that before, being able to work from multiple locations but feel like you're always working, you always have access to your data, You don't have to worry whether or not the coffee shop that you've gone into is able to dial in and support access through a VPN. Application integration. Mobile application development is very popular right now. A number of organizations that I work with are busy building their own mobile applications just by virtue of the way that businesses need to run. Insurance brokers wanting to create their own claims application need something to write all of these photos, being able to send documents easily to their customers, but in a highly secure way. And then, to a lesser extent, end user backup. Being able to protect the endpoints, I think, is a very big thing. I tend to separate that out from enterprise file sync and share. While you do get to protect your most mission-critical data and make sure that even if you lost your laptop or your mobile device, your data would still be accessible and restored as soon as you got a new laptop or phone, it's not entirely endpoint backup. That I tend to separate out. And the reason for that is it's just different goals from the outset. File sync and share is meant to deliver mobility and collaboration, and user backup is meant to protect all of the data regardless of where it is and what type of device it is. Now I'll briefly touch on some deployment models here. So when you're beginning to evaluate your file sync and share strategy, I think that things you'll want to look at are the vendor capabilities, their viability, their strategy, their reach, from a product capability standpoint, making sure that the deployment model aligns with your business, the features that you need are met, or at least enough of them so that you're comfortable regardless of the solution that you pick. And then lastly, the functionality and usability. Most people are using Dropbox today. If you're going to replace that with an enterprise file sync and share solution, you need to make sure that the user experience is as good as or better than what they currently have today. And then, of course, you have solution price, but that's always the fun conversation. And then on the right-hand side, we have a list of some of the vendors that I've evaluated over the past year and a half. You have your 800-pound gorilla with Dropbox. They now have a Dropbox for Business. You have Box. You have EMC Simplicity, WatchDocs, Excelion, SharePlan, which is from Code42. Citrix has their ShareFile. And then right now I have it listed as VMware Horizon. VMware just recently acquired AirWatch, which will likely, from my understanding, become their main file sync and share solution with their secure content locker. And then we also have Cetera. Now I've seen 10 to 20 other solutions out there. There's only a limited amount of time, and I can kind of dive into pretty much any of them, and I work with a number that aren't listed here. But those are just some of the solutions that I've looked at personally. Now, when you look at the deployment models specifically, there are really three different approaches that you can take. You can go with a cloud-based or software as a service-based solution. Externally hosted allows for greater flexibility, and the benefit there is that you don't have to care about infrastructure. All of that is has already been deployed. The redundancy is there. It's already pre-built. And you can just set up your admin console and begin deploying the solution to your end users. From a hybrid perspective, those are typically internal gateways or some kind of broker to internal or external storage. Usually it's an on-premise appliance, and you get to choose based on policies you set up with your users whether their data is allowed to be stored in the cloud or whether it's stored in an on-premise behind the firewall storage system. And then I call it internal or on-premise. You license the necessary software and you deploy the hardware internally, and you set up your own internal private cloud, so to speak. And from there you have, with cloud, it's the greatest level of flexibility, and with most people, typically an on-premise solution would be viewed as the most secure. All right. See a couple of questions out there that I'll hold off until the end of the webinar, but please feel free to keep them coming. I'll make sure that I address as many as possible before the end. So with key features for evaluation, I segment them into three different things, three different tiers that you would want to look at. You have your mobility features, and you place a certain level of value there. You have your security features, and then you have your application integration features. For mobility, things like making sure that your endpoints that you have, the desktops and laptops, have clients for Windows, Mac, or even Linux desktops. Being able to access the type of mobile devices you have, whether that's an iOS device, an Android device, Windows, BlackBerry, being able to securely share documents, being able to provide that online and offline access. I won't go through all of these, but making sure that the data redundancy and high availability is kind of just built into the solution, or if you're going to deploy it on premise, have a very simple path to being able to deploy that. From a security perspective, there's a very wide range here. Some basic ones are being able to set file permission, single sign-on, and of course comprehensive auditing and reporting. I think that's almost table stakes at this point with any file sync and share solution. If you're not able to provide a comprehensive log of all activities performed, then you might as well just go back to your traditional file services. Because at least then you would, from Windows logs or Linux logs, you would at least be able to see certain activities that were performed on the particular files. Here you just get a much better view into where your data is. And of course you also need data encryption, whether that's in flight or at rest. Typically any solution will require both, particularly if you're going to look at the cloud. If the data is not secured, then I think that's pretty much game over for any solution out there. From application integration, really whether or not it integrates with certain third-party tools or solutions out there, your document content managers, your SharePoints of the world, your Documentums, along with maybe even being able to just view your traditional file services, since there ends up becoming that wonderful conversation of, do I no longer deploy, or what do I do about my existing file servers out there? Do I just do a bulk migration into a file sync and share solution? Sounds great in theory, but more than likely you probably won't, particularly at extraordinarily large scale. To do that would be a long, very probably arduous process, and the way to do that would likely take a long time to build out that governance structure. So you might just need to kind of draw a line in the sand where new data is created and stored in a file sync and share solution, and slowly let the existing traditional file servers expire and retire that infrastructure, and regain that TCO savings, that power and cooling, all that stuff that's currently costing money within your data center. And then, of course, you just need to be able to custom brand it. You're not just going to want the traditional out-of-the-box deployment. You're going to want it branded for your organization. And then, of course, you also need to be able to integrate with some of the just very basic applications out there that most people use. Your Microsoft Offices of the world, your Adobes, and then even to a greater extent some other file types, by being able to preview that regardless of mobile device you're on. So if you want to take a look at CAD drawings, you'd be able to preview that. If you want to even go one step further and be able to edit and annotate documents, those are the things I would view as application integration. In terms of deployment models, from a pros and cons perspective, with cloud, you have that pre-designed redundancy. It's an OpEx model, so you just pay per user per year. Pretty much any of the companies, all the companies on the right have some form of software as a service. even from an on-premise perspective, it's typically still a software as a service where you're still paying a per-seat license per year. But the benefit here is that you eliminate all of the supporting hardware, and you can just manage the information itself rather than needing to also manage the infrastructure. So the amount of time and effort that it takes to deploy is significantly less. From my experience, it tends to be the least expensive solution if you're going to build out kind of a total cost of ownership. The reason for that is most people don't have a file sync and share solution, and usually the cost of a license is the same whether it's an on-premise license or whether it's a cloud-based license. Now, that's not to say that that's for everybody. Certain providers more than likely will be able to offer discounts, particularly if you bundle hardware in. They'll be able to give you greater buying power. The challenges here, lack of indemnity by service providers. Basically, if something goes wrong, they're not at fault. And then some security concerns, the NSA data mining scandal, being able to just ensure that if your data is stored in the public cloud, that nobody's able to view and pull the encryption keys and just start looking at your data, particularly with highly sensitive, executive level information, financial data. A lot of that stuff most people would be a little hesitant to put out in the cloud. So you just want to make sure that, do you get access to the encryption keys? If so, where does it get stored? From a hybrid model deployment, it's kind of the best of both worlds and the worst of both worlds all at the same time. You get the flexible choice of deploying what data gets stored where, and you can have it be either a CapEx or OpEx model. In certain instances, you do get to control the upgrades and planned service outages, but typically this is the most complex deployment because it requires the most time to figure out, okay, which users do get access to store their data in the cloud, which users do I have to set up for on-premise, and then when you go on-premise, making sure that you design a highly available infrastructure. A lot of those are very key considerations there. Some examples of that are EMC simplicity with their storage vaults. You have Watchdocs, SharePlan, and ShareFile as well. Those are just to name a few that actually do that. And then from an on-premise deployment, you're able to design your infrastructure and ensure that it's built to security best practices, store behind the firewall, use some form of load balancing in your DMZ to make sure that internet access is able to be routed, but you don't actually have to store the equipment within your DMZ. It tends to be a more CapEx-friendly model, and you do usually get to control the upgrades and planned service outages. The challenge there is that it's really the most cost-effective at scale. You need usually a multiple thousand seat deployment in order to really kind of justify the costs, because there are server costs, typically VMware costs, and then you usually need 2 to 3x the amount of equipment to be able to set up a highly available infrastructure. And then on top of that, at least from the storage perspective, you usually need 2 to 3 times the amount of storage twice that you would use in order to be able to maintain multiple versions of the same document and give that to the users. All right. Take a look at on-premise deployment infrastructure requirements. Things that you'll want to consider if you're going to deploy an on-premise solution. Typically a scale-out NAS platform, whether that's EMC's Isilon or using NetApp's InfiniVault technology. The reason for that is it's going to offer just reduced administrative overhead to be able to manage all of the files that will end up being created and stored on-premise. You do need about 2 to 3 times the amount of capacity, and that's really to maintain versions. While certain solutions do have deduplication, every single change that's made and saved and synced to up into your private cloud, you do need all of that additional storage. depending on the solution, sometimes they'll even go and restore and store the exact same file twice, just to make sure that all of the data is fully encrypted and nothing is touched between the different versions. Usually you can get away with very dense nearline drives. Usually it's fairly low in terms of storage requirements from an I/O perspective. From a block storage perspective, it's usually pretty minimal. You typically get a template that you deploy a virtual appliance in VMware, spin it up, set up the necessary IP addresses. If it connects into an orchestration layer in the cloud, just make sure that it's set up that way. That's how simplicity operates. You deploy a virtual machine from their template. You set up a couple of IP addresses. You register it with your simplicity deployment, and then you provision your storage vaults using any NFS-based storage and start writing to it. Or you can even leverage an object store like Atmos, their Atmos product. So I touched a little bit on the compute. You'll usually want some kind of SSO or Active Directory integration as well. And then from a networking perspective, typically you'll deploy this behind the firewall and leverage some form of load balancer, hardware-based load balancer within your DMZ in order to route back behind your corporate firewall, so that the infrastructure is not in the DMZ. That gets a little problematic for some people, since if for some reason an intruder gets into the DMZ, they would have access to all of the data. So typically, when you're looking to deploy any of these solutions, key teams that you're going to absolutely want to work with, especially if you go on-premise, legal and network. Those are two of the people that will probably need to be involved from the get-go, just to make sure that everything is set up, and regardless of the solution, legal will help absolutely determine whether or not they're okay with storing the data in the cloud. And usually that tends to hinge on whether or not they maintain a copy of the encryption keys or not. All right. In terms of why now, we have shadow IT. Users have Dropbox. To deny that would be a little surprising, unless organizations have gone so far as to block the ports that Dropbox exists on. I've even talked to healthcare organizations where they have Dropbox invading their environment, and the solution I often hear is, well, we don't have an alternative. And that's really kind of driving why a lot of organizations are finally embracing why they need to deploy it is, hey, we don't have an alternative. We understand that our data is no longer secure. It's getting out there. We might be violating regulatory compliance, but since we can't offer an alternative, we're not going to anger our users and then push them even further into shadow IT. So they have it. The end user is not going to come begging IT for this solution. This is really going to be IT driving the need for their end users to get on board their solution. And again, it needs to be a solution that gives equal or better performance to what they're getting with the Dropboxes of the world today. From a data loss or data leak prevention, once IT deploys the solution and the users embrace it, they can make sure that they have visibility, be able to deliver additional initiatives, whether that's your BYOD initiatives, your endpoint backup initiatives, or mobile device management. Realistically, we harden the data center first and foremost, but now as more and more data is pushed out to the endpoints, we need to figure out a way to secure that. Being able to make sure that we can remotely wipe data off of laptops, mobile devices, so that in the event of a user leaving the company, quitting unexpectedly, that we can set that poison pill and wipe the data while also being able to retrieve it and access it if it was valuable information. Regulatory compliance concerns, that one's a fairly obvious one. If a healthcare organization is sharing patient health information and it's stored in an insecure cloud, that's a very big problem. I personally wouldn't want my medical records out in the cloud, where if some malicious user really wanted to take advantage of that cloud and take that data, that's very concerning. So the need to get that comprehensive auditing and reporting, being able to figure out if somebody has shared the data incorrectly with somebody, or if somebody has accessed the data, that's another key feature. I know of a certain organization where there have been lawsuits thrown around because, hey, somebody left the organization, stole a bunch of intellectual property, but they shared it with a file sync and share solution. Lo and behold, because of the comprehensive auditing and reporting, they were able to prove that this person did in fact rip down all of this information, drop it onto a thumb drive, and take it with them. But since they pulled it from this file sync and share solution, they were able to prove that they took the data. So that leads into better data visibility. And lastly, it's just being able to deliver value back to the business. Since the business isn't going to be requesting it, this is something where IT can become proactive and say, hey, we need to secure our data, but we're going to make sure that the user experience is better than what you have today, and it makes sure that our data is protected and that the business is protected. You get to access your data anywhere, anytime. You can collaborate with internal, external users because we've already set policies on the way you can go about that, and then being able to edit and annotate documents from your mobile devices, your laptops, all of that kind of stuff as well. So from a heads methodology perspective, we really kind of take a consultative approach when it comes to file sync and share. Since a lot of customers are really kind of just starting to dip their toes into figuring out whether they want to deploy a solution, we initially have our strategy and roadmap offering, where we can help you define your requirements, figure out your use cases, get a clear understanding of which solutions will meet your requirements, help you build that consensus, and build a technical and operational and functional analysis of being able to justify that in your environment. And then from a roadmap perspective, being able to help you move towards that long-term goal of having an enterprise file sync and share solution in your environment, being able to help kind of prioritize the onboarding of certain use cases. Some of them might make a lot of sense, but depending on the solution that you choose, might not be able to address your needs day one. Help you figure out the timing, make sure that you work with your internal teams to develop your corporate governance policies so that document exploration can happen, making sure that you have kind of global permissions and setting up the file structure, since it's basically like starting from scratch. And then how to eventually decommission legacy infrastructure and or set up an archiving policy, depending on whether this is an on-premise or cloud-based solution. And lastly, once you're past the strategy and roadmap phase, we have our design and plan, which will help you figure out how to deploy it, build out the design, particularly if it's an on-premise, help you build out that infrastructure, making sure that we leverage as much of your existing infrastructure as possible, and then figure out where your gaps are and help you, complete that. And then from a plan is really documenting the plan, giving you the exact number of steps, who needs to be involved, what the project plan would be, and the level of effort to do that, and help you execute on that plan as well. So that's really it in terms of the webinar itself. I noticed that there are a number of questions here. I'll start from the beginning and work my way back. How can I find out what my users are using today for file sync and share, and how much of it are they using? That is a good question. First, there would be working with the networking teams to figure out, they should be able to determine the ports that are open and be able to, depending on what level of networking they have, be able to figure out what applications that ties to. Had a customer who bought a new set of firewalls, had all the ports blocked immediately, and all of a sudden they started getting calls from their customers saying, hey, Dropbox is no longer working. That's one. If you ever start having conversations with the enterprise file sync and share providers out there, some of them are able to provide you a comprehensive list of users with email addresses registered to your corporate domain. That's probably the easiest way to figure that out. Some of them are really, really great at being able to provide that list nearly instantaneously. Others just takes a little bit of time for them to go back into their records and pull that data. In terms of how much or what data is being synced, realistically the only way to do that is from in-depth network analysis. If you don't have that solution in place, there are certain means to address it, and that could certainly be a follow-up conversation as well. Would I consider SharePoint in the Office 365 hosted environment a vendor in this space? I wouldn't consider SharePoint. What I would consider is Microsoft. They recently rebranded SkyDrive Pro into what they call OneDrive for Business. It just launched the beginning of this month. I wouldn't say it's entirely ready just yet. They have a number of things that they're going to be working on throughout the end of this year to really kind of turn it into a true enterprise file sync and share offering that will certainly be attractive to big Microsoft customers if they're working on Microsoft EAs. Some key things that they're missing that give me concern is, since it's purely cloud-based right now, they don't have data encryption at rest. So the data that you store there is completely readable by anybody. I view that as pretty concerning. And they just don't support some very basic device types that I would require. Right now they only have sync clients for Windows devices and iOS devices, so you're leaving out Macs and Android phones and tablets. That's a pretty big gap there. So that's what I would consider from the Office 365 suite of products to be their file sync and share offering. Are there solutions that can automatically scan my existing LDAP AD permissions at a file folder level and incorporate them into their own system? No. At least I'm not aware of that. Typically, depending on the solution provider that you would select, they will ensure that that's successful based on their services engagement. Most of the time, since this space is so new, the level of services cost is fairly low, and they want to make sure that whatever you decide, they have the ability to provide that, whether that's with an EMC Simplicity, whether that's with a box. They have the services teams that are capable of being able to help you reset up all of those permissions and make sure that your security layout meets your current setup from your traditional file servers, so that when you start to deploy and the solution to your end users, that the permissions and security infrastructure is set up and configured, and then you can start doing a move if you wanted to from a decommissioning of your file servers. Do I have to manually migrate my content from my existing file servers? Are there good solutions for this? I frequently get this question, and sadly there really is no utility out there that can say, okay, I'm going to deploy EMC Simplicity. Here's, press this button, and all of a sudden I'm going to do a bulk import of all my data. There just isn't that tool out there. I'm sure that there's somebody that thought of it and is really kind of, partnering with certain solution providers to come up with a utility that can do that. But because this space is so new, right now it's a manual migration of data. And that's where, at small scale, that can be a fairly easy process. At very large scales, you're pretty much going to have to draw a line in the sand and figure out what data do you want immediately access in your cloud or your public or private cloud deployment, and then the rest of the data, comes in phases, or you just let it expire and then decommission the equipment. How does this compare to VMware Horizon Workspace? Personally speaking, I'm not entirely sure if VMware Horizon Workspace is going to stick around. VMware recently acquired AirWatch, and to me, from people that I've talked to, the end user experience with Horizon Data was not as strong as they would have liked from a file sync and share solution. It was kind of a good basic starter, but a lot of things that people would want. More than likely, they would embrace the secure content locker with AirWatch in order to be able to address that concern. It's certainly a fully baked product. The thing what you would do is you leverage your existing infrastructure and deploy, and that becomes a secure container for all work-based data, so that you could have end users with their own personal cell phones or tablets and have that be the one-stop shop for corporate data that can't actually exit the secure content locker application that would be deployed on mobile devices or from sync clients on your Windows and Mac desktops. And lastly, how do you avoid file and folder sprawl? The answer to that is there's no good answer. It's my least favorite answer in the world. It depends. Making sure that you limit who has visibility into what files and folders. The challenge also then becomes, okay, now they'll also see their own folders that they create in that tree as well. So it's no longer just group shares that you're seeing, and you have to actually go and explicitly click on that group share directory, and now all of a sudden you see the files and folders there. But within the same pane of glass, you're now also seeing personal files and folders. Realistically, it's going to require some thought before deploying. Figure out that plus your governance policies to really avoid that problem. Another big thing that you'll probably want to avoid is right-clicking on your user directory and telling it to start syncing all those files as well, because then all of a sudden you're going to see system files, executables, things that really aren't pertinent to a file sync and share solution. That's where I also separate the line between file sync and share versus something that I would consider to be like an endpoint backup solution. And they're mutually exclusive in so much as they accomplish different things. Does a file sync and share solution allow you to back up data that you find personally important? Absolutely. It allows you to restore data in case you accidentally fat finger something and blow away a document. You have that. But, they accomplish two different things. Okay. Let's see. What's the buzz around Citrix shared files or WorkShare's collaboration sync solution? Not entirely sure about that. From a Citrix share file, that's just Citrix offering around the file sync and share space. It goes to their Zen Mobile offering, which combines their mobile device management solution with virtual end user computing. They have their own unique set of features. Typically, it's deployed either in a public cloud from Citrix's cloud, which sits on top of Amazon, or you deploy it. You deploy their storage zones and be able to store certain data behind the corporate firewall, provided that you have something that can speak SMB or CIS. All right. Don't see any other questions here. I'll keep this open for another couple of minutes if there's any remaining questions that pop up. If not, I'll certainly follow up with the people that requested about the presentation being available. Make sure that gets tagged, and I'll follow up with them and make sure that they can get a copy of this document. I'll be happy to share that with you. So, again, thank you for all attending. I'd be certainly happy to follow this up with any demos that you might want to see for any particular product. a further technical deep dive on any of the solutions, and we can go from there. So I do appreciate everybody taking the time today, and I'll just leave the last couple of minutes open for any last questions. If not, have a wonderful afternoon or day, depending on what time zone you're in. I do appreciate the joke that just came in about, can you put the slides in Dropbox, please? I could try and make that happen for you. Alrighty. All right. I haven't seen any other additional questions come through, so at that point I think we'll just end the webinar. Again, thank you everybody for attending. Have a wonderful afternoon.